How you doing?
I am well. I am well. It has been a week, a week and a month, and just lots and lots of FYC. So feeling good. I have about 25 more titles that I'd like to get through before the end of the month, but I may or may not. We shall see.
Yeah, that's always the struggle.
It's a rich field. I don't know how anybody did any kind of voting for the Critics Awards. I'm like, how did you watch anything before? I mean, because I feel like things are just now starting to come out.
Well, that's the thing is things are just now starting to come out, right? But the studios throw all this stuff at us. You know this at the end of the year. Even if stuff's coming out in January or February or whatever, they want to get it out because that's when the window is for actual voting. So it
Right.
is always a cluster F trying to arrange time to watch everything, and especially in this wonky COVID era,
Yeah.
without that real festival buzz, because they've had a lot of film festivals and stuff, but they're usually, or now they're online, they're virtual, so it's harder to like read something that doesn't just sound like more noise, like, hey, I saw
Yeah.
this movie, as
Yeah.
opposed to
Well,
I'm traveling to Toronto or I'm traveling to Cannes and here's my reportage of all the exciting stuff going on to really elevate things to the top.
right. Right. And I mean, a lot of the stuff I'm seeing now, it's like premiered at Sundance, premiered at Sundance. I'm like, that was a year ago. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the other bizarre thing is I usually find myself in that spot too with fellow critics who in the past have gone to those festivals in the beginning of the year, and then they see those movies and then they get to watch them again when it's time for awards consideration. So they've got that. Granted, there's usually several months gap in between, but they have that benefit of being able to sit and stew on things and really think about these
Right.
over the course of a year. Whereas I'm usually just trying to play catch up, as
Yeah.
evidenced by what we're talking about here today, the second of our two-part for your consideration podcast. Uh, I had made my list of top 20 films of 2020, and I had intended to get that out in late December and then in early January, and now it looks like it's going to be early February because
You keep
with
watching.
well, with this trio, not so much
Yep.
with the last group, but with this trio specifically, I'm seeing two films that I have to make room on my top 20 list to get
Yep.
that math just right. The third one is damn close, but I don't think it's really quite going to be a contender. But yeah, that's the hazard of all of these things, and I almost appreciate more the fact that I had this breathing room over the last couple of months, even though I didn't get to consider them for the voting, which is unfortunate.
Right.
I got to watch them on my own terms and enjoy them as movies rather than just as cramming in homework.
I'm interested to hear which of the two and what's the outlier.
Well, yeah, and I'm interested to share and to get your thoughts on all three of them, because I think they're all great in their own ways, and they all have a lot to dig into. Unfortunately, this is not going to be a 3-hour show. This is going to
That's
be
right.
about it'll be about 45 minutes or so. Because last time what we did was we each talked about two films that one of us had seen that the other had not, and then we talked about and we did like just a few minutes on each, and then we did a centerpiece of one film that we both watched. This time we're talking about three movies that we have both seen, and we're going to devote about 15 minutes or so to getting into some of the topics surrounding these movies. I mean, they might lead to longer conversations later, but this is kind of the high points. And I feel like we should feel free to talk about spoilers in these, but if there is any point where you feel there's something like, oh, we don't want to give that away, I'm totally cool with that too.
Okay, great.
So what you being my guest, I'll leave it to you. Oh, this we can do it this way. This will be the mystery. You name a film and we'll talk about it, and I'll let you know if it's one of the three or one of the two that is on my list.
Okay, yeah, cool. I mean, just kind of going in order. I watched Minari, and it was the first film of this crop that I went. That is a great movie that should be considered uh, instead of just for performances, like as an all around film. Like
Yes,
I think it's a great film.
I do too. That was one of the two.
Yeah.
Um, I just finished watching it about an hour ago. This has
Okay.
been, well, we're talking about cramming in movies. This week I'm watching like 7 films and 2 of them are 3 hours long. So I'm just trying to make it all work. So I watched Minari this morning. Um, the director is Lee Isaac Chung, I believe. I'm not familiar with their work, if this is a debut or several movies deep into the canon, but uh, I agree. I was affected by this film in ways that I could not have expected, and it reminded me of another movie I talked about last week called Driveways. Did you see that one with Brian Dennehy?
I haven't yet. It just came onto my radar.
Okay. I did a whole podcast about it with David Fowley. He is gaga about that movie, and I feel about Minari the way that he feels about that film. And one of my criticisms of that movie was that it was too short. It feels like it's just over an hour, maybe an hour 20. This movie is closer to 2, and it definitely has that room to breathe, but you've got the 2 parallel stories of an Asian family moving into sort of a white bread rural town, and the kind of dynamics they have going on within the family, and also was with the community that isn't quite sure whether to accept them or not. So the similarity is kind of in there, but there are some touch points that between the films that are very much the same. So this movie, it focuses on the Yi family. The dad is played by Steven Yuen. The mother, I didn't look her up because again I just finished watching this. Monica is played by Yuri Han, a great couple of lead actors. They're bringing their 2 little kids to essentially a trailer home in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, so that they can work jobs at a hatchery, and he can live out his dream of starting a family farm that grows specifically only Korean food. This is in the early 1980s, before you could go anywhere in America and find like a local like ethnic section of town with a grocer and all that stuff. So he was really kind of a visionary of that time. Uh, it's not an easy life. It's not an easy picture. And I was completely surprised by the end of the movie.
And I mean, the idea of telling it, I mean, we've seen films told through the lens of children. We see it primarily through the young son David's eyes. A lot of stuff is transpires before him, but there's so much to unpack in terms of the cultural differences between the Korean and the American. There's the generational gap with the grandmother, and in some ways, the grandmother feels almost more progressive at times than the mother.
Yeah.
And the father is embracing his Koreanness, his background, but he's also wanting very much to be American.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just felt like there was so much going on, but not in a heavy-handed way. Everything felt very organic, and it felt very human. Again, he was. I think Will Patton's character is terrific, and it's lovely to see him still finding new ways to be used as a character actor. Because he first came to my attention with No Way Out back in 1987, I think it was. And it's just been great to kind of watch him continue to evolve as a character actor, but not playing the same character all the time.
And especially in this film, I was shocked when I first saw him on the screen. I'm like, he's playing this type of a character.
Right.
That was a nice revelation, but also with a lot of the choices that are made in this film, because Chung wrote and directed the movie. I don't know if this is autobiographical or whatever. I should probably look this stuff up, but it felt like it was very real and authentic. But this character of Paul, he is a Korean War vet. He may have some mental, disabilities coming out of that conflict, because he doesn't, as we say, he's not quite all there. I guess that's the easiest way to say it, and also probably derogatory. I don't mean that at all. But he dances to the beat of his own drum. He's very religious, spiritual, whatever you want to call it. He comes on as sort of an assistant to Mr. Yi in starting up this farm dream, and he has a lot of insight, and he's got a lot of intuition. But I was just waiting for him to for there to be a big problem surrounding his character, but there wasn't. He was just a nice, it's almost like a Boo Radley situation where
Yeah,
like
no,
something's wrong with this guy, but no, he's actually he's pure of heart, as pure of heart as you can be.
yeah, it reminded me a bit of Sling Blade, if the character of Carl Childers was a supporting part.
Yes.
Instead of being the central character, if it was just we went into town and we met Carl Childers, and he's kind of the strange one who works at the service station. And you'll see him in passing from time to time, but he doesn't mean any harm. Yes, he had some hard times. It's like there's a whole story around Paul, and the fact that the kind of push-pull relationship between he and Jacob, the father, because Jacob definitely needs his help and welcomes his expertise, even as he kind of rejects the religious qualities and the sense of community that Paul would like to bring. Paul would like to be closer. I get the sense that he wanted to be taken into the confidence, and he wanted him to, but there's a bit of a distance being kept, and whether that's cultural, whether that's personal, we never really know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great, like the initial meeting where the little boy David meets Paul for the first time, and Paul says he doesn't have any candy. You kind of get the feeling if he had a candy in his pocket, would have given it to him, but he gives him something out of his wallet, and it's old Korean money from the Korean War.
Right.
And you realize that David has a connection to that, and so does Paul. And it's the kind of connection that I think in a lesser film would have led to a stereotypical, rift. But it's just this awkward, sweet moment between characters who don't really mean anything by it. It becomes a bonding symbol between their families.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm getting goosebumps talking about this, but there's also a wonderful multi-layered religious aspect to this movie, because the wife, Monica, you get the sense that she wants to have more of a community. She complains because they live so far outside of any towns with a Korean population, really. And she gets the idea of like, well, what about church? And churches in town is far away. Jacob hears her talking to one of the coworkers at the hatchery about this, and he decides, well, let's try church. And then that doesn't quite work out either, because they stand out in this church because it's an all-white congregation, as you might imagine. Right. There's no discernible ill will in terms of prejudice, but there are just those kinds of like weird feelings about outsiders coming in and questions. You got the two little kids coming up and interrogating the son and the daughter in ways that are very cringy, but then the outcome, you realize they're just being kids, and this sort of leads to something resembling a friendship in those cases.
Yeah, it's born of a sense of innocence almost.
Yeah,
innocence and ignorance.
Right. And it was refreshing to see, and at some point you need to watch Driveways to get what I'm really talking about. The small town in that movie, I swear, everybody was racist. Like it was like the filmmaker was trying to make a point. And again, maybe that was from a different perspective. They actually experienced that, but it just felt more of a message movie than something like this, where the prejudice, if it does exist, comes out in ways that are not as overt, usually like they do in, real life. Sometimes you run into that, but not as often as in some films. But yeah, towards the end of the movie, I appreciated that this couple whose relationship is hanging on by a thread, it does kind of fall apart. And then there's a bit of hope, but that hope is born out of an absolute tragedy, a beautifully filmed tragedy with a fire that I won't really say much more about, but I was mesmerized. One of those rare occasions where I'm like, once everything opens back up, I'm going to lobby for Minari to play in a theater so I can watch that last 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and not to get too woo woo, but the fact that the elements really do play a part here. Fire, water, sky and land. I mean, it really is of, it is nature having its way. And man's constant desire to control nature and bend it to its will. But at the end of the day, nature has the final say. And, like, I love the different uses of water throughout.
Yes.
The water from the sky, the water from the pipes, the water from the stream.
The water from the mountain, as they called it.
Yeah. Yeah.
the mountain dew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, there was a lot to be explored. And again, it's my favorite kind of symbolism in that it's there if you want to look for it. It's not beating you over the head.
Yeah, very much so. And I also love what you're talking about. Nature, kind of has its own plans, but the resiliency of this family also sort of inspired by, this is going to sound cheesy, but this is a great sort of American dream type of movie. People believing in it, coming here and working really hard, because we hear a bit about the story of the family before they moved to Arkansas, and it just sounds grueling, but they keep picking up and trying again. I was convinced before I realized what exactly kind of movie I was watching that there's a snake that appears about midway through the film. I was like, that snake's going to come back, and there's a young child, and it's going to be bad news. All praise to Mr. Chung that that snake does not reappear. Spoiler.
Yeah, I would say that's the thing. Like, Chung avoids a lot of cliches and pitfalls, and like you said, it could have been a Boo Radley character, but it isn't. And I think in the hands of a lesser writer director, it might have been.
Yeah. So that's Minari. That is, I think that's out. I should have looked up if whether or not it's out or not, but I'll post a link to the trailer and some release information in the description. So as not to further embarrass myself. All right. So spin that wheel with 2 slots remaining on it. What are we talking about next, sir?
I get to choose again. Okay, great. Well, I would say, because I want to save this one for last, next is One Night in Miami, as opposed to One Night in Minari.
Is there a way to get all 3 titles into one title? One promising
A
night
young woman in One Night in Miami.
That sounds terrible. But no. So you want to talk about One Night in Miami next, and save Promising Young Woman for last? Okay.
I do.
All right. Well, this is appropriate because One Night in Miami is the second of the 2 films that I put on my year's best list. I was talking about this on another podcast. I think this film presents a great excuse for the Academy to expand their actor and, by extension, actress category to 10, maybe 20 slots, so that 4 of them could be occupied by the 4 leads in this movie. And I think it's also a great time to set a new precedent of either an best ensemble Oscar, or just give the best male lead to all 4 of these guys, because this movie floored me in ways that I still can't fathom. I watched it last week and I'm still thinking about it.
Great.
Now, you hated it, right?
I did not hate it.
Okay.
I felt that I intellectually appreciated it more than it actually emotionally engaged me.
I think I felt that way too. Yeah.
I felt like it's based on a play by Kemp Powers, who also did the adaptation.
And he was also the co-director and, I believe, writer of Soul, the Pixar movie that came out recently.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't. I think it's a great play, but I felt like it feels like a play put on screen, in that it's such a dialogue-driven movie.
Yes.
With a lot of heavy ideas and concepts, and characters making speeches to one another, as opposed to anything approaching natural sounding dialogue. That was my initial takeaways. I was like, there are some great words here, but they feel like words written to be, in a theater, they say that, like the playwright is king because it's all about the words. Here, I felt like we got stuck in that hotel room and we stayed in that hotel room because that was how the play ran out. And then, like it felt like, Regina King and Mr. Powers were finding ways to get out of that hotel room. But it felt like, no, everything really should take place in this hotel room, and you're making the effort to get us out of the hotel room so we don't remember that we're stuck in this hotel room for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I don't feel like there's any faulting any of the performances. I think the performances, all four of them, basically the conceit is that Malcom X, Cassius Clay, football star Jim Brown, and singing star Sam Cooke are all together for one night in Miami. It's the night after Cassius Clay captures the heavyweight champion, Cassius Clay, who would later become Muhammad Ali. And it's them all kind of sharing ideas, and it kind of it becomes a political movie.
Yeah.
In the best kind of way.
Very much so. I love the film. I understand your critique, but I feel I don't know exactly how else they would have brought a stage adaptation like that. And I think this is an important movie for people to see, but plays don't have the accessibility and the reach that a film does. Right. So when you're going to adapt it, I imagine they took a lot of liberties, because there are some things I can't imagine them. Well, I don't know how big the production was, but we do spend a fair amount of time outside the hotel. There's the scene going to the liquor store. There's the flashbacks to where these characters were before they, even went to Miami. There's a lot of buildup getting to that hotel room in Miami, which I appreciate. The other key point, I think, is that this was also the night before Muhammad Ali announced that he was joining the Nation of Islam.
That's right.
And I know this is based on some kind of historical event, but I don't know how much license Powers took with it and how much further license was taken with the film adaptation. Right. But what I loved about it primarily was how this showed Malcom X as a character, because you hear about him. People may have seen the movie, the Spike Lee film where Denzel Washington gives an excellent performance, but he's always portrayed as being this, a man who was larger than life and had a very definite mission. And he's always cast as the shadow to Martin Luther King's positive vision of, how races could get together, back in the 60s, and visions for the future. In this movie, he's a human being, and he's got foibles. He's got dreams and ambitions that are hampered by not necessarily just the white man that he's constantly railing against in public, but also by the Nation of Islam and the community that he is a part of and is in the process of trying to separate from. The one interesting note is that we get a bit of a postscript about what happens to him after the events of the film. And it says that he was shot a couple of days after he said this thing about being a target or being a martyr for the cause. They don't specify who shot him. Now, I wonder if maybe for people who aren't aware of who shot Malcom X, there might be this assumption that it was sort of like how Martin Luther King went out, but it's not. And it's a very interesting story. I just thought that was an odd thing to leave out. Maybe it's implied by the events of this film and the paranoia that comes that the character displays against about everybody. But yeah, for as much of an ensemble piece as this is, I really feel like it's Malcom X's story, and I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, I agree. Although I will also say that Leslie Odom's portrayal of Sam Cooke, I feel like he really goes on an emotional journey. Probably the most, along with Malcom, I feel like, and tell me what you think of this. I feel like Sam Cooke's character undergoes the biggest change, because Malcom X is struggling throughout, but I don't know that we necessarily see him come out a different place than he came in. Same thing for Muhammad Ali, except in that he is deciding to make the decision, but it was something that he was considering joining the Nation of Islam, and then he does officially.
Yeah. I think
Cooke,
a lot.
Cooke is happy being an entertainer and realizes that through the talk he has with the friends, that he has the power to offer change.
Yeah. His is the most outward facing arc of the, you know, a lot of the other conflicts that we have in terms of these characters are things that we're privy to because we're the audience watching them. You know, even when someone walks into another room, we follow them. The other friends might not necessarily see what's going on, how they're reacting to things. So I think there's a lot of change within the characters, but not what you might see in public. Yeah, Sam Cooke is a fantastic example. And it's almost like this, to take it in the realm of comics, like and people have said this about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, like the Magneto versus, you know, Charles Xavier kind of philosophies about how to move the movement forward. And I think that's why these two characters shine the brightest in this ensemble.
Agreed. But yeah, and that's not to say I disliked the film. I mean, the criticisms were ones, again, they were intellectual criticisms. I was like, oh, I feel like this feels like speech making, even though it's really good speech making.
I guess my question is, no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I guess my question is, how do you get around that while still making the same points?
People don't generally do monologues. I think that's kind of what makes film different than theater, is that film is a dialogue and image driven medium, whereas theater allows for those moments of just standing and listening to somebody talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say. The biggest difference is that I felt the theatricality of it in a way that I would have liked not to.
That's fair. I understand that difference there. I would say that, you know, two kind of counters to that. One, the people that we're dealing with are not, or were not, regular people, in that they were public figures who are used to being the center of attention and speaking in a way that grabs people's attention. You know, you've got an actor / football player, you've got a music impresario, you've got Cassius Clay, man. I gotta say, Eli Gorey was just, he nails the impersonation, but builds it into his own character to the point where he's so ridiculous in public that it's hard to shake off in private.
Yes.
And what I get about the friendship of these four guys is they seem to have known each other for a long time, at least in some cases. I think Cassius is the youngest of the four. When I found out he was 22 years old, I'm like, get the hell out of here. World championship. But you get the feeling that in this hotel room, because they haven't been with each other in a while in this capacity, they have to bring each other back down from the bullshit. So I can see a lot of speechifying, a lot of emotions coming out. And I get my memory is that there are a lot of instances where someone was about to say something that was going to be antagonistic, and then someone else would say, no, hold on. And then someone else would say, no, let him speak, which is kind of the opening to, you know, there's the spotlight. Step
exactly. And you know, I didn't dislike the film, and I thought that the performances across the board, not just the four leads, but also the supporting characters. You know, if this doesn't win an ensemble award, I will be very surprised, because it is that strong. However, I was also thinking Minari has an incredible ensemble as well. So it'll be interesting. The fact that both of them are ensembles of color, that's that's a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to that point, there's a big discussion. It is a philosophical discussion between Malcolm X and Sam Cooke about, the Black community, Black power, the best way to navigate the whiteness of America, which is, you couldn't have released a movie in a more timelier period than right now. What I loved about what King and, um, oh my God, Kemp Powers. I don't know when the stage play came out. Do you happen to know that?
I don't.
Okay. But the conversations that are being had, there's such balance in that it is not just one thing. It is two sides going at each other, both with some really fantastic points, and that classic leaving it up to the audience to wrestle with this stuff coming out of the theater. If you, or the the streaming service, if you think you're going to go in and, I'm not just for, Black audiences, but for white audiences who might look at this and say, oh God, it's a drama about Malcolm X in a hotel room with three other guys. I can only imagine what this is going to be about. It is that, but it's also not. For anybody who's going into this thinking, it's going to be Malcolm X in a hotel room, just like sticking it to the white man. It's not that either.
Not that either.
Right. So I think this is, it's a movie that people really need to see, especially if we're going to actually have an open dialogue, and the word of the day is unity, particularly moving forward. We're recording this on Inauguration Day, incidentally.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just so we don't neglect the fourth of our quartet, I thought Aldous Hodge, as Jim Brown, was just fantastic. He's kind of the quiet center of the movie. He lends such a quality of gravitas. And what's interesting is he kind of came on my radar earlier this year with The Invisible Man.
Mm-hmm.
He plays the friend to Elizabeth Moss's protagonist. And I mean, that guy has some guns on him. Like that guy is jacked. And so when he was showing up as Jim Brown, I'm like, well, yeah, the big guy, you bet. And it was just, because I do like, we had just watched The Dirty Dozen maybe a month or so earlier. And so it was fun to see him, on the set of The Dirty Dozen as he was announcing his retirement from football. I don't know that Jim Brown is a great actor, but he was a great screen presence.
Yeah, very much so. And I love that in this film, I don't know if this is from the stage play or not, but we do see a little vignette of what each character was doing before they go to that big boxing fight.
Yep.
And his trip to meet with a quote unquote old family friend played by Beau Bridges. It's such a weird scene. And after it's over, you realize all the subtext that was in the language that they were using. And then that stinger at the end, the restraint in Aldous Hodge, and I guess by extension, Jim Brown, it was unbelievable. Because you wonder what's going on here. Why are they out on the porch? What's the deal? And I don't want to spoil this moment for anyone who hasn't seen it, but that's the opener to a film that I think is full of a lot of great little moments on par with that.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to make sure we gave him his time in the sun.
Yeah. And I thank you for doing that. Cause we talked about the other three. They are all, that's not to say that anybody in that ensemble has a lesser part. They all get equal play pretty much too, which is pretty incredible.
Right, which is pretty great. Yeah.
Yeah. One final shout out.
Would you say these are supporting? Now, I guess what do you do with the categories now? Are these leads or are they supporting?
I'm going to make a case for leads because, and that's the thing, maybe they have to be as an ensemble because that implies that they are all, so integral to creating the success of the piece. But, I guess technically they are supporting actors because no one really stands, it's not like I've said it was Malcolm X's story. It's not really he just gets, he's more revelatory, I think, than in terms of the things we've seen about him. So yeah, I don't know. But one final shout out to Regina King. Fantastic bit of direction, particularly the boxing match, and then later on, a later scene in a diner that was just great with Malcom X taking pictures. It's just so cool to see visually him portrayed as something other than the bombast on the soapbox in the square, to see him just kind of nerding out and being like obsessed with his camera and obsessed with his friends, and just a totally different, milieu, if that's even the right word.
And if I'm just looking up really quick, I think this is Regina King's first, it's her first feature directing credit. She's directed a few TV episodes and TV movies, but this is her first feature film.
Okay, well then, yeah, there needs to be an Academy Award for best directorial debut, and Miss King, I'm happy to give that to you if I had any power, but I don't. Let's move on to the third and final. You don't have to spin anything because there's only one slot left.
There's no spin. There's no spin. There's just pick that up.
You want to lead off on this one? Yeah.
What? Yeah. Promising Young Woman. It basically, we got Carey Mulligan playing, she plays a character who feigns being intoxicated in bars so as to be taken home by, unsuspecting men who are thinking they might take advantage. And then she, of course, reveals that she's not, in fact, intoxicated, and kind of beats them at their own game. And that's all born of, it's born of a subplot of what she was, why she has been driven to such measures. And that ends up kind of driving the film. But I kind of, as I was watching it, I'm like, she's like a superhero against male toxicity. And if there was ever a time we needed such a superhero, it's now. So for those who don't know, I'm a self-defense instructor. And so like, I'm constantly kind of like going, when I see the douchebags, as men show up, I'm just like, oh my God, like just punch him in the mouth, just punch him in the mouth. And, she does one better, but I was really kind of excited by that character, but also excited by Mulligan's take on that character. I think it could have been really easy to turn that into a one-note cliche, and it is not that. And she finds a way to humanize a character. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is. I will look it up, but
Sandra,
thank you. But yeah, I was really, really taken with the film overall. And I feel like it's the right film for our Me Too times. I
sort of agree.
Yeah, well, obviously, since this wasn't in your top 10.
No, top 20.
Or it wasn't even your top 20.
Right. Well, you got to see the rest of my top 20. But
also, it's directed by a person named Emerald Fennell, and how can you not love that?
Yeah, what do we know about Emerald Fennell? Do we know anything?
I don't know, but I'll look it up while you tell us what you think.
Okay. I love this idea of the sort of the unconventional, not a superhero, more like a vigilante type of a character who is going out and exacting this sort of revenge on the world, but the origin story is revealed over the course of the movie, and it leads to the forward momentum of the real story. If we're just watching Sandra, week after week going out and doing this to men and then working days in a coffee shop, her mild-mannered alter ego, secret identity, that could get really tired. Even when she encounters an old classmate from med school, Ryan, played by Bo Burnham, that would be a cliche where you've got someone who's either a superhero or a serial killer who finds someone and gets redeemed by them. We've seen a million of those movies. What I loved about the direction of this film is that Ryan brings back into her life the old wounds that she's been on this crusade. I'll just say it because a friend of hers was viciously raped in a med school dorm party 7 years earlier, subsequently dropped out of school. I don't know if they actually said what happened to Nina. I think it's implied that she killed herself, but I don't know if there was actually any lines in the film about what ultimately happened to her. Did I miss something?
I don't think you missed anything. I don't know that I'm pretty confident she's not living anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're not ever led to believe that an accident befell her, I can only assume that, yes, that she took her own life.
Yeah. And, when Nina dropped out of med school, Sandra dropped out of med school to take care of her. They've been best friends since they were, little girls. So it hit her understandably quite hard, and then inspired this crusade. When Ryan comes back into her life, he mentions, or maybe it's a coincidence, Sandra finds out that one of her old classmates, the one who perpetrated the act against Nina, is about to get married. And he is, I guess, a successful doctor or something. He's well off. There have been no consequences legally or cosmically for what he did. So she enacts this plan to kind of set the bar hopping aside and go on a mission to climb her way sort of up this ladder to get to him, by going through the lawyer who helped get him off, played wonderfully, I think, by Alfred Molina, to Connie Britton as the what is it, the dean of the medical school.
Dean of the medical school.
Yeah, that was a terrific scene. There is some really wonderful stuff in this film. My only problem is it shares a lot of the traits that I've seen in a lot of films that deal with a similar subject matter in the Me Too era, which is, I understand what they're trying to accomplish, but there's not a balance in terms of the portrayal of masculinity. You I think mentioned toxic masculinity. We very rarely get to see a masculinity in these types of films that is not toxic.
Correct.
The only example that we have really is Sandra's father, played by Clancy Brown, in a role that is the most un-Clancy Brown role I think I've seen him in. But he's great. And Jennifer Coolidge plays Sandra's mother. She's usually in these kind of comedic roles, but in this, she reminded me of the mother from American Beauty, not quite catatonic, but just sort of out of it and disconnected from things, possibly because of what's happened to her daughter in the years since this tragedy. But yeah, from the opening moments in that bar where we see the 3 or 4 douchebag businessmen cartoonishly ogling the drunk Carey Mulligan in the corner, I'm like, I know exactly where this is going, down to the point where there's a revelation about Ryan later in the film. And I'm like, of course, because if there are going to be any good men in this movie, it's going to be one who's relegated to 10 minutes of screen time and everybody else is a scumbag. And that played out here. And it's just annoying because, again, I understand the point. I think the message of the film and the way it goes about it is great, but I just wish there was a bit more balance, because I think I see a little bit of a potential for a rah-rah, like, let's go watch this movie. It really hates men because men suck. If that's your thing, that's great, but I don't think it helps anything.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, that does kind of feel a little bit like a not all men defense.
Yeah, and I think that's valid.
Right. And for me, what comes from that is I think there is an inherent sense of complicity. And so, no, not all men are predators, but also not all men are doing what could be done. Like there's an environment in which men have been allowed to continue this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't just because, I guess it doesn't all fall to the women. So if this prompts men to be better men, and to show me that you're not like all the others, because the thing is, like, I feel like we've all had those moments. Even our character played by Bo Burnham, I believe he is a genuinely nice guy, and he wasn't participating in the group rape, but he was there, and his reaction was, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening."
Mm-hmm.
And you go, and yet, what did you do? And I feel like that is an inherent reflection that is, it's a mirror held up to the men in society going, I understand that you recognize that it's fucked up, but what did you do?
Right. But I think you need to like walk that back a bit to some men in society, because frankly, most of the men I know, at least I would like to think so, and I include myself in that in that category,
Sure.
would do the right thing. It would have been much more interesting to me if Ryan, even if he wasn't complicit, if he found out that his old classmates, his old friends were complicit and worked with Sandra to help bring them down, that's a different movie, I understand it. Or if
Right.
he did remember, or he confessed before he was found out that, yeah, I was actually there that night and I didn't do anything. I feel sort of like what happens with the lawyer character. She shows some mercy on him. God knows what would have happened to that guy if he had just said, get out of here. And, she was asking for it and all this other stuff. But
right.
Again, talking about that balance, if you're talking about if men see this movie and it convinces them to be better men, that's sort of my issue. I don't know that there are going to be men who go into this movie who aren't already on board with, being an ally, being a good feminist. If you got like a traditional, frat guy douchebag who's even on the fence watching this movie, I don't know if you're going to get him to watch this movie. Because by the tagline,
Fair enough.
it's about a girl who goes and she like sticks it to men because all men are rapists, right? And I'm like, I have no interest in seeing that movie because it doesn't. Sure. I don't think it relates to me. And even if it did, is there going to be any kind of, trying to understand me as a person, as even if I'm not a douchebag, rapist, or complicit in it? Is that what you think of me? Because I'm not interested in that conversation.
Sure,
I'm not.
Sure. I mean, no, I guess this is the thing, is like that we have all been, and I do believe this, we have all been, if you are a man, you have been complicit within the culture in some way or another. There has been something that has occurred that you witnessed, or that you benefited from the system as it exists. And and if that's a hard truth, so be it. But I feel like it is a truth, and I feel like this is a film that isn't afraid to show that. Now, from a dramatic standpoint, I understand it would be great to have some equal representation of decent men versus, questionable men versus the ogres. But by showing us that all men in the film are complicit, you're kind of like, how wrong is that? And like that to me is like, no, that is correct, and that is why we have the systemic sexism that exists, and why we have to examine it at a whole. Who benefits from the system?
Well, but no, I mean, women benefit from the system too. Now, it's an entirely different conversation, because I view this in a lot of ways as a sexist film towards men. And you can talk about power dynamics and does that matter, because, but men have had all the power, so women are entitled to think this way about men and show it in their art. They are entitled to it because it's art and you can do whatever you want. But I can also say, I don't agree. I have benefited from the system, because it's I don't know exactly how I've benefited, if it's because I appear to be a white man or, a straight white man or whatever you want to call it. But everybody, or I should say a lot of people, have benefited from the system and been screwed by the system. That's an entirely, I think, different conversation. So when I'm being presented with a piece of art that says you are complicit in some way in what is going on screen, I can say, no, I'm not. And if you want to ask me how else I'm not a witch, we can have that conversation too.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, and that I would hope that it does make us, because I don't think we're going to change the mind of the douchebag frat boy. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But what might happen is that the men who want to be allies, but the men who want to be allies by not being part of the problem, for them to realize that that is part of the problem, that it has to be an active seeking of the solution. And I think that's where, when you talk about who benefits from the system, it's like, yes, we benefit from the system just by inherently being men and being white. We inherently benefit from the system that is predisposed to benefit us, even as we recognize the inequality. And are we actively trying to dismantle that system, even though it might not benefit us anymore, even though we might lose some power? That's what I hope a film like this asks of us, as prospective male allies, to be like, you know what? I am complicit. I didn't do all I could do to tear down the system that benefits me, because it benefits me.
Well, I think that's a philosophical argument, because I don't agree that the system needs to be torn down. I think it needs to be perhaps made more equitable in all the ways that we can work to do that. But when you're talking about tearing down systems, that's an entire, you're talking about systems that undergird the entire world, which is not going to happen, because as much of a progressive culture as we live in, there are other parts of the world where they would absolutely not stand for it and probably take advantage if we even tried. And you want to try living under a regressive system, the US got nothing on some places, right? So I understand what you're talking about. I also think that it's not just an important message for men to absorb, but the danger, I think, is reinforcing some, anti-male or I'll just say anti-male beliefs in female audiences who may be going to this movie and seeing everything that they thought about men validated on screen with that lack of balance. Just as much as you might say, I want to sit down and watch Porky's Revenge or something, where all the women are nothing but objects and the guys are like, cool dudes are getting away with cute pranks and mild racism,
Right.
going into that and saying, why aren't you enjoying this? Well, because this doesn't speak to me. And I also kind of feel like I'm being attacked if I'm a woman in that scenario.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's the thing. Like I can take the shot. I'm willing to take the shot. I'm willing to be told that I've fallen short from time to time. And I feel like if you're not able to accept that, then it's like, okay, well, then you're right, that there isn't a conversation to be had. And I feel like, every once in a while we need a film that says, look, I get that you're a good guy, but there have been mistakes made.
Yeah, sure.
And I feel like that there's a lot of that happening in this film. It's like mistakes were made, and you have what she asks of all the characters that they just say they fucked up. And it's when they do admit it, that's when she allows things to move forward. but she is confronting us and doing it in a very uncomfortable way, in the same way that I think the film is. I think the film is like its star, or like its main character, confronting us and saying, you have to say that you messed up. You have to say that you didn't do it right all the time, and that you're going to do better. And like I'm okay with a film doing that, because that's my feeling. I agree. I'm like, you're right. I haven't done the best I could do at all times. I have looked the other direction sometimes because I was uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I guess my critique is that, again, in the light of Me Too, we've had so many films and TV shows and messaging that are exactly along these same lines that I'm
Mhm.
like, all right, yeah, if I am complicit, you keep telling me that I'm complicit and you keep telling me I need to do better. At what point is me doing the best I can enough for you? And why am I also answering to you? Who are you? And how are you so pure that you're telling me that I need to atone for having messed up? Women, are you really that vulnerable and disempowered that, you know, we have just been the scourge of everything? Or can you recognize that you've had your own achievements and maybe we need to work together to, put some of this behind us, because a lot of it is historical. You're not finding a lot of cultural momentum for the toxic douchebag. So it's
Mhm.
like, when do you stop flagellating that corpse and say, okay, we've established we all want to work together towards something beautiful. Let's start building instead of, rehashing old stuff.
I I understand that, and I guess what I would say to that is, it's the same reason why we keep having stories of racism told, and we will continue to have stories of racism told. And at what point, at what point is it enough for me to be the white guy who's really trying? It's the fact is, the system is still unfair, and I think we have to keep having that mirror shown to us.
Right. I also just think that it's unfair to, as much as the system is unfair, I think it's unfair to put the burden of the entire system on the shoulders of every individual within that system, especially when they are actively trying to do everything that they can. It's
Right.
like, if you keep yelling at me, like, do better, be better. I'm like, I am. What are you even talking about? You be better, So I get it. I want to say, though, those nitpicks aside, I really think that this movie goes to some fascinating places, especially I've heard some critiques of the end of the film, the climax,
Oh
saying that
man.
it does change and it changes tone and it kind of turns some people off. I There was a record scratch moment for me for sure, but then what builds off of that leading towards the end, I thought was brilliant.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, we did kind of go into the philosophies of the film without actually talking about the elements of the film. I mean, I think the performances are fantastic across the board.
Yeah.
I I didn't know where it was going narratively. I had an idea, but like it just kept going. I mean, like the surprise that we get at the first reveal of the first scene with Carey Mulligan, I felt like we kept getting moments like that where you're like,
Yes.
oh shoot, what I thought was happening is not happening at all. Um, and yes, the end of the film, my God, uh, I that was one of those where I was just like, wait, I wait, are you wait? At some point, you need to like tell me this is all not happening the way it looks like it's unfolding. Um, and that was like, oh shit. I was thinking, I'm like, okay, you just lost like 60% of the people watching this movie.
Well, especially because there are so many different revelations. I mean, there is a main character who dies, and that very well could have been the end of the movie. And I
Yeah.
think if that had been the end of the movie, it would have been a very powerful thesis statement about everything that had come before and
Yep.
the filmmaker's perception of the way society works in the favor of men.
Right.
We don't get that. What we do get is a mashup of the Hangover films, in that it turns into this really wacky, uncomfortable bro comedy where this main character is dead and there's the aftermath of like, we've got to, hide the body, cover this up, I won't tell, you won't tell, but it's sort of played for laughs, down to
Yes.
the one character who's constantly crying and freaking out. It's played off as being funny and not something traumatic.
Right.
And then we also get a Saw ending where justice comes. You think they're going to get away with this, but then justice comes to everybody through recordings and gifts that are dropped off to certain people. That was the best use of a Saw ending since probably Saw 2.
You just reminded me though. I will say that I thought there's the video that shows up kind of as a plot. The plot kind of hinges on this video that turns up.
Right.
And I felt like that was a little convenient. I was kind of like, oh shoot, I wish there had been a different way of doing that. Not to say it didn't yield some good rewards.
Yeah.
Because it does. But I was like, so there's just been this video floating around for however long and nobody knows about it. And it's like,
well, so that didn't bother me so much because it was 7 years ago. And I think that was one of the bits of social commentary that I think was very apt and very disturbing. This was so matter of fact a practice on this campus, this party with blackout drunk people having sex with each other consensually or not, and probably people filming them, that there's probably dozens of these tapes, as they're called. It's a cell phone video floating around out there that people have either forgotten or deleted, or it's on an old phone so that they've thrown into a pile somewhere. It's not even a thing because they're all successful doctors and rich people now.
Right. And I think that's also to the point of Emerald Fennell, writer director Emerald Fennell, is that the fact that they do exist out there and people don't care.
Yeah, they upload them onto the internet for for people to watch as free porn.
Yeah, I think it's also like what you just said. I think what makes this movie a little special is that it is a comedy. I mean, it plays very much like a comedy. There's a lot of heightened comedic moments throughout, considering kind of its dark undercurrent.
Yeah. And even the climax, the kind of heroic Saw moment, is sort of funny in the way that it's doled out through a series of text messages. You're like, oh, it's comeuppance with some gleeful laughter. One thing, have you ever seen the TV show Veronica Mars?
I saw the movie.
Okay. Then you might have some idea of what I'm talking about. But if you ever get a chance and the inclination, go back and watch the first season of the Veronica Mars TV show. This is probably 13 years ago or so. It deals with a very similar situation where there's two popular high school girls. One of them is, I believe, sexually assaulted and killed at a party, and there's a mystery surrounding kind of a whodunit, and a best friend who's left behind, who she doesn't go on a killing spree. She becomes a detective as part of her father's private detective agency, trying to take down the bad guys. And that old case comes back, and she's finally given a chance to solve her friend's murder. Twists and turns abound. I was reminded a lot of Veronica Mars watching this movie, because I was talking about that balance that I was looking for in terms of portrayals of the masculine archetypes. That show had a lot of toxic masculinity throughout it. This was in the pre-Me Too era, so it was very progressive in terms of its attitudes of showing this isn't cool behavior, this is terrible behavior. But there was also a balance of, here are some guys who are allies, and it doesn't turn out midway through that they were also part of the gang rape.
Right.
The other connection, though, ironically, is that two of the cast members in this movie, Promising Young Woman, were also in Veronica Mars.
I get the feeling that Miss Fennell might have been a fan.
Very possibly, or just a cosmic coincidence that I happen to love. And they don't show up until that last party scene. So towards the very end of the movie, where it's like, okay. It's not just a coincidence. But yeah, so Promising Young Woman, the more I think about it, I don't know that it's going to make my list, but it's damn close. It's going to get an honorable mention at least, because I think as a film, as a piece of filmmaking, it's pretty spectacular. The performances are all great, and it's got some wonderful twists and turns in the story.
Agreed. Yeah, I was, it was one that, I would say that, like Minari, it was a one that I came away from going, that was a really interesting piece of art that I'm going to be talking about going out into the virtual lobby that is the internet and, you know, my living room.
I think you might have just come up with a new business model, the virtual lobby, you know, for
Come on,
people who
everybody, let's go out to the lobby and talk about this movie
no, but
with
just
our
think
pie and ice cream.
But just think about that. Like, because, I think One Night in Miami is streaming now on Amazon Prime. And I think Promising Young Woman just came out on VOD last Friday. They both dropped the same day. So, but I'm thinking, what if you rent Promising Young Woman, and as part of Amazon streaming app, or however you see it, you can see that like 3,520 people are also watching. And then as the credits roll, you can say like 2,015 people have also just finished this movie, enter virtual lobby, and you can go to like a little discussion room, like a Zoom
There
or
you
a text
go.
thing, and say, hey, what'd you think of that movie? Kind of like an after lobby chatter.
I like it. I like it. Would you host something like that?
That's way
Like
too ambitious.
like a little Q&A afterwards? Be like, hey, what did you think? Instead of having a special guest, you just kind of poll the audience and have a town hall meeting.
I think we're onto something. First, we should copyright this 2021 Christensen Simmons Productions.
Yeah, before we put it out there onto the YouTubes.
Yes. All right, man. Well, with that, I think A, that's a great idea, and I want you to be in my lobby.
Great.
And B, I really appreciate you doing this FYC part 2 with me, because again, I discovered at least a couple of gems that I got to go back and put on my list. So yeah.
Great. And I look forward to future chats. Although we'll probably bring our conversations back more around to the dark and the scary.
What, Promising Young Woman didn't do it for you?
That was just good, clean fun.
God. Yes, very soon we'll be taking a trip back to Hammerland, so I'm excited about that. So stay tuned. But until then, thank you very much, sir. I always appreciate your insights and your perspectives on movies, and today is no exception. So we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.